Hi, everyone. I'm Thérèse, and this is New York Girl Again, The After, the podcast for caregivers who have survived the hardest chapter of their lives and are now gathering both the courage and the strength to write the next one. If you listened to last week's episode, we talked about what love does to you, how it changes you, how it makes you real. Today, we're stepping into the shadow of that conversation. We're going to talk about what happens after. And I'm going to be very honest with you. I'm going to say something that, back when it was still very fresh, would have made me want to scream. There is good in goodbye. And if hearing that makes you want to turn this off, if it feels like a betrayal of the person you lost, please stay with me for a moment. I know that feeling. There is nothing good about the loss. There is nothing good about the empty bed or the silence in the hallway. So let's just sit in that truth first. When we talk about grief, this is what people think of: the loss of your person, the silence where their voice used to be, the absence in the room, the moment you realize there is no more time. This is the grief that is visible, the grief people recognize, the grief people send their condolences for. But what I've learned through my own experience and by sitting with this and trying to understand it more deeply is that this is just the beginning. Because from that loss, it's like a dam breaks open and other types of grief begin to surface. There are layers of grief that start to unfold unexpectedly from all different parts of your life. Some of you know exactly what I mean. The friendship that changed during caregiving, the people who disappeared, the ones who didn't show up in the way you needed. And then, after your loved one is gone, you expect maybe things will reconnect. But sometimes they don't. And that brings a different kind of grief. Not death, but disappointment, disillusionment. The realization that the people you thought would be there aren't. Then there's losing your identity. This one is one of the deepest, because caregiving doesn't just take your time. It restructures who you are. Your identity becomes caretaker, protector, manager of everything, lifesaver. And then one day, that role is gone. When a role becomes so central to your life that when it ends, it leaves behind a void. And that void feels like grief. It is grief and deserves to be recognized as such. Then there's losing faith in people. This one is complicated. And for me, it's been very difficult. Because sometimes, after everything you've been through, you try again. You open your heart again. You trust again. You believe in people again. And then you get hurt. Not in the same way, but in a way that hits just as deep. And now you're not just grieving your loved one. You're grieving the trust you had, the community you thought you found, the neighbors that you thought were family, the version of yourself that believed in people. That's real grief, and it deserves to be named. Then there's losing your sense of safety. After caregiving and after loss, something shifts internally. You've seen too much. You've carried too much. And your nervous system doesn't just go back. This is where trauma and grief overlap, where your body stays in a state of hypervigilance, exhaustion, emotional overload. Everything is urgent, and you start to realize you don't feel the same way in the world anymore. That's grief too. So you may be wondering, where is the good that I'm talking about? And this is where I want to be very careful, because I'm not saying this was good. It wasn't. What I'm saying is this: something can grow in the space that loss created. In grief research, there's something called post-traumatic growth. And it doesn't mean you're glad it happened or that the pain goes away. It means that over time, some people begin to experience a deeper appreciation for life, a shift in priorities, stronger boundaries, and a clearer sense of self. Not because they wanted to, but because they were changed. For me, the good wasn't in the saying goodbye. It was in the becoming. It was the moment I realized I could rebuild my health, reclaim my joy, and decide, for the first time in a very long time, what I wanted. And that is where the good began. Not in the loss, but in what came after. The goodbye was the end of my role as a caregiver, but it was the birth of the woman I am becoming today. And if you're not there yet, if you're listening to this and thinking, there is nothing good about this, you are not wrong. You don't have to rush to meaning. You don't have to find the lesson. You don't have to be strong, and you don't have to have a plan. Grief isn't a mountain you climb. It's a companion you walk with. And sometimes you just need someone to walk with you. And after everything I went through during my 25-year caregiving journey and the 5 years in the after, I needed to understand it better for myself and for all of us caregivers. That's why I dove into learning more. That's why I completed a grief educator program through David Kessler. Because I remember the silence of my own house after my dad passed, the last leg of my caregiving journey. I remember feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and everyone was telling me to just fly. But I didn't even remember how to breathe. That's why I'm happy to be offering one-to-one guided sessions specifically for people like us. This isn't therapy. It's a space to understand what the after actually is. A space where we look at who you are now and who you might become. The hardest part isn't always the caregiving, although that is tremendously hard. It's the moment in the after that you realize you have to start living for yourself again, and you don't know where to start. We all know there is nothing good about losing the people we love, but there is something beautiful in who you become because you love them so well. That becoming takes time. It takes a lot of grace. And it takes the kind of courage that only another caregiver can truly see. You are not alone. I'm Thérèse, and this is New York Girl Again, the After.